Founder
right?
led.
I mean, that's
Yeah.
one of the, I mean, I kind of think of that as a moat. You know, it's like Elon, he took Tesla to heights. Zuckerberg took Meta to heights. I think Karp is one of those guys, if you go deep into him, like, is he the guy to 20x Palantir? Because honestly, if he steps away, I don't know if I keep investing in Palantir. I'm like, I think that's the guy. And, you know, we can get into him if you want, but I also think that is a part of like the bull case to at least throw something into Palantir. It's like, do you think that guy's eccentric enough? He's shaking hands with Volodymyr Zelensky a couple months after the war starts. Is that the guy you think can 20x the company? And if that's the case, you know, maybe that's the case.
So tell me, why is he that guy?
Well, so Karp, you know, I've studied Karp deeply over the past couple of years. Karp got a PhD in philosophy in Germany. And so he's an existentialist. He thinks very deeply about the philosophical sort of nature of human existence and societies. On top of that, his grandfather died when he was about 26 years old and left him a big inheritance. So he had a couple $1 million, I believe, to play with, and he started a VC fund at 27, 28 years old. And he was very successful. I can't name the companies that he invested in because I can't find any of that information on the internet, but it was to the point where he had a lot of wealthy people giving him money to manage because he was taking these weird bets on startups and they were working back in like the late 90s, early 2000s. So you've got a guy who has a business sense in terms of a capital allocation. And then you've got this philosophical side of him that really thinks about the world in an interesting way. Then he goes to Stanford, meets Peter Thiel, and Thiel sells PayPal for 1.5 billion and is like, look, and then 9/11 happens right after they sell PayPal. And he's like, can we have used any of the software we made at PayPal, which is essentially fraud mitigation software? That was the moat of PayPal, and pattern recognition and data analysis at a time where that wasn't even a thing in 2001, to then bring that to the government. And that's how it got incubated by the CIA's venture capital fund to actually become a defense contract and become a company. And he asks Karp to run the ship. And so you've got a guy that for the past 20 years has been at one company, has a deep philosophical understanding of the nature of how data privacy, ethics, security systems work, and is a good capital allocator. And then you have to ask yourself a deeper question. If Palantir was used in a wrong way, which is why Palantir has never done business in Russia and China, this software could like truly kill the world. I mean, like if it gets into the wrong hands, some people could do some really bad things with it. So
why?
Well, the software, like let's just look at targeting in and of itself, right? I mean, the Palantir is a piece of software called Meta Constellation, where they take real-time geospatial intelligence from the sky, and it uses edge AI. Edge AI means the AI is not running on a server; it's running at the edge, right on the device, and you're getting real-time intelligence on how to kill people, how to get rid of Russian tanks, right? So you think of a company or a country like Russia and China having access to that software. They've got targeting stuff. They don't have anything close to what Palantir has. And that's like just documented and well proven. And if they did, you know, they would be doing a lot better in Ukraine. So if they had access to that, or if they had the capability to build stuff like that, what would they do? And we would argue some pretty bad things. And so you've got a guy leading a company that understands that, right? He's not profit at all costs. In fact, investors hated him for 10 years because he didn't do business in all these different places because Trump wanted to build a Muslim database. That's when, and they asked Palantir to do it. Palantir said, no, we're not fucking building a Muslim database so you can track all the Muslims in America. Like they do have ethics for the people that say they don't have ethics because you have a CEO who actually cares about that type of stuff. He's managing how to protect civil liberties so that the world doesn't spy on you. With governmental protection. And here's one point I really want to make that I want to get your take on as well. Peter Thiel is a libertarian. So Peter Thiel believes in little government, right? He believes in Ayn Rand type of philosophy, self-rationalism. He's like, less government, more just let me have freedoms. But after 9/11, we had the Patriot Act. So after a terrorist attacked, the United States government was like, okay, we're going to invade all of your privacy because there was no chance in hell we're ever going to let something like this happen, which resulted in massive government surveillance, the NSA, a lot of Islamophobia started to happen in the United States, all that type of stuff. So Peter Thiel's philosophy for starting Palantir was actually the most contrarian thing ever, which is why I love this guy. And Alex Karp kind of agrees with this, which is if you want the government to not invade your life, to not surveil you, we need to have a safe society. Because as soon as something bad happens in society, the government now has an excuse. They literally can use that as the reasoning, as the means to the end, to be able to justify massive surveillance. So the only way to stop the government from invading you and surveilling you is to not have those problems happen. Well, the only way to not have those problems happen is technology. So if you are able to stop terrorist attacks from happening, which is Palantir found Osama bin Laden. Palantir did many things in Europe to stop right-wing terrorism from increasing. Then you have a government that doesn't have an excuse. They just have software that can stop bad things from happening, but they can't say, oh, this bad thing happened, therefore we have to surveil you even more to make sure you're not part of the problem. And that philosophical narrative of Palantir is only led by someone like an Alex Karp and a Peter Thiel that truly understand that mission and then can scale that into enterprises, where enterprises, the biggest thing they care about is data security and privacy, to make sure that, you know, none of their confidential data is leaked. And so I think he's the guy to get the job done.
So how is Palantir preventing bad things from happening, or trying to minimize bad things from happening without using data that is invasive?
That's a great question.
How do they do that?
So this is where they have something called cross-tracking interfunctionalities. I know that's a lot of buzzwords, but the point is they have built their software with the granular access controls that allows the CIA, for example, to have certain access and controls and relationships with different databases that the CIA is monitoring for whatever the CIA is doing that the FBI doesn't have access to. Before Palantir, this didn't exist. If the CIA or the FBI just wanted some pieces of data, they would, you know, go in their little spreadsheets. They would figure out the data. You don't know who has control over it. You don't know who accessed it. You don't know who touched it. This, that. This is why Trump is going through all the classified document stuff right now. With Palantir software, if the CIA is doing something in relationship to a potential terrorist attack that is happening, but the CDC or the NIH or the FBI is not allowed to have access to that data, that's all built in to Foundry in and of itself. And so this is why governments have adopted it in the first place, because a lot of governments have been like, okay, we need different organizations working in a centralized location where they can work with data and not make sure the data is compromised. Now, in the context of, are they using certain data on, you know, us? I think that's every government in the world. They all have a digital profile or Farzad or Amit, and they all have some level of control over you. The question is, are they abusing that? And I think what Palantir has done is actually thwarted a lot of the government's overreach, because they've been able to stop bad things from happening and protect different agencies from not having access to certain types of data, which has overall been net good at the end of the day for everybody else.
But doesn't that mean that Palantir is that entity that has all the data?
No. So Palantir, this is another misconception. Palantir doesn't store any of that data. It's a government's data. It's a company's data. This is why there's a bull case for Tesla and a bear case for Palantir. Tesla is an AI play. All that FSD data is proprietary to Tesla. Like, at the end of the day, Tesla owns that data and they can leverage it. Palantir doesn't own any data. Palantir owns a picks and shovels tool that is like top of class to organize the data and to help organizations better understand it. So if you disinstall Palantir tomorrow, it's not like Palantir and their servers in Colorado have the FBI's data, because like they don't own that data. The FBI owns it. The bull case is because Palantir is integrated so deeply into the FBI and they're so effective, the FBI is never going to get rid of Palantir. They're always going to keep giving them money because the FBI needs to manage data. And if Palantir helps them do that with the correct technology and access controls, then Palantir is a smart product for the government.
Interesting. So what I'm hearing is, so what you just described, sort of this, this really helps me. Like, thank you. This is very valuable for me, by the way. Thank you. This is awesome knowledge for me to really get my head wrapped around this thing. So Palantir has the operating system sitting with multiple organizations and governmental entities that would benefit tremendously and are currently benefiting tremendously from, quote unquote, sharing the data between each other. But Palantir is the middle player that's ensuring that what gets shared is not too much data, that it's just enough for them to do their job without violating any privacy sort of things that could arise. So my thing goes, like, how do we know that's actually happening? Like is Palantir really the company? Like, are we just trusting Karp to ensure that he is playing by the rules? Like, how do we know this is actually legit?
It's a good question. It's the same question of like, how do we know Facebook's not looking at my text messages, even though they say it's encrypted? It's like, get the fuck out of it, Zuckerberg. You know, you're looking at that shit. You know, it's just like, it's hard to kind of justify. I think in the context of governments, Karp was at an interview the other day, I think in Bloomberg, and they asked him, like, you know, how do you know Ukraine's using your software? And he's like, we know. He's like, when they stop using our software, we know. He's like, we can see how they're using our software. We can control it. We can understand it, all that stuff. We can see all that type of stuff. And so as a result of that, you want to believe that as they've licensed the software platforms to the entities that are using it, they've created the controls necessary to make sure that those platforms are used in an ethical way. Now, is that happening? I would argue yes, on the simple assumption that if it wasn't happening, I don't think the software would be that effective. I think we would see a lot more security breaches, a lot more confidential data being leaked, and a lot more overarching surveillance that's going on in the world. I think the Snowden files and a lot of stuff like that, it has decreased dramatically, and that's sort of my naive way of compartmentalizing it. But at its core, I don't think Ukraine. Oh, here's the actual answer. I just thought of the answer as you're saying it. The first answer was like, okay, I want to trust Palantir. The better answer is Europe. I mean, that's really the answer to your question. Europe is a stickler for GDPR regulations, data privacy frameworks, etc. And Karp and Palantir do a lot of business in Europe. I don't think European governments and institutions would ever allow a spy, evil software that is harnessing all of our data, taking it back, blah, 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 doing all this type of stuff, if it was actually doing what they said they were doing. And so I think the European business is a good hedge against Palantir manipulating data. Not saying it's not happening, because I think it could definitely happen in every company. But given the extensive work they're doing in Ukraine, the UK, et cetera, and how those governments have no tolerance for that, even though the United States has a lot more tolerance for surveillance because freedom and all that stuff, I would say that's the reason why you would trust Palantir and just assume that they're better than any other governmental contractor that could try to solve this problem.
Interesting. But then I guess where my mind goes to is, if Palantir reaches their goal of, say, world domination, right? Like they're just everywhere in 10 years' time, and they have the framework, the pipes that hook up to the data that they don't own. But then theoretically, they have a schema, or call it like a network of data that there very well could be interplay between the different data sets. So, like, say there might be airline data that a freaking food manufacturer could use, because they could time their shipments to go places, and Palantir can be the bridge between those two companies, right? Like that's where I think that's where it could be incredibly valuable for something like a Palantir. You're creating bridges between data sets that you never thought would exist, A, because companies don't want to give up their data, and then two, because of from a technical perspective. But because Palantir is a middle company, you very well could create those bridges, which could mean that both the airline and the food manufacturer could become incredibly more efficient, because they're utilizing each other's data without lifting one finger. It's just Palantir does it. But then here's my concern. When Karp inevitably dies, what happens to this corporation that theoretically has access to everything? What happens then?
So it's a good question. 2 points. Number one, that conclusion you came to about the network effect is phenomenal. I mean, and it is exactly correct. I didn't get to speak to that, but a lot of people say Palantir is a consulting company because they send these engineers into BP or Tyson or United Airlines and say, how do we help your business? And then it takes them 18 months to get paid. In those 18 months, they're finding so much R&D. They're doing so much research and development in terms of how do we actually help an airline solve their manufacturing problems, supply chains, logistics, et cetera, that they take that data and that becomes a network effect to then help Southwest Airlines and all these other companies. Insofar as Palantir developed a software with Airbus back in 2017 called Skywise. Skywise is an operating system for the sky. And I would encourage people to read a little bit more about it. I've done some videos on it. Almost every airline manufacturer in the United States is using Skywise for logistics, supply chains, et cetera, to be able to manage their fleet of airlines. And that was only done because they did a partnership with a company for 3 years and developed that network effect that they can then feed into so many other industries. So that's a really good analysis, and I think that's a major bull case for Palantir. In terms of if Karp dies, I think if Karp dies, someone needs to be at the head of Palantir that understands the deep responsibility Palantir has. This is why they have F-class shares. This is the FU shares, right? Because their whole argument is there is no way any institution, a Carl Icahn can come in here and say he doesn't like what's going on and then replace me. Like I have to be the guy. And so I was happy to approve his F-class shares. And I think he's the guy to get it done because he's proven over the past 20 years that he actually cares about this stuff, which is why he's the guy I want to invest in. If he dies, that's a big deal. And that would definitely question my investment thesis in Palantir. Similar to if Elon dies, I question the investment thesis on Tesla. Now, I know Tesla's a well-oiled machine and it can run, but Elon's a big part of the moat as well. So I think that would be interesting for both companies.
Interesting. Okay. So the F-class shares to me is a signal that Palantir very much has thought about this in the long term, and that's what they're going for. They're going for that. We want to be the operating system for corporations on planet Earth. We want to be that Palantir. It's like from freaking Lord of the Rings. You know, that's why they got their name, right? Is the Palantir.
Yeah.
It's the all-seeing eye, whatever the
Yep.
hell that
Which
little
is why
thing is,
people
right?
consider it like a spy company and all that stuff. And it's a myth that they haven't done a good
Yeah.
job at clarifying. But the F-class shares are also an FU to shareholders, because that means if we don't like what Karp's doing, we can't vote him out. We can't say like, hey, like we can not express share voting and class structures are the only way shareholders have a real say in the company, like a real way to do something done, which is vote his ass out. We can never do that. So investing in Palantir is a real big, like, I trust this guy, which is why everyone analyzes what he says so deeply. And you wouldn't assume he's lying, because if he is and he has F-class shares, I mean, he knows investors will leave in a second if he's lying to them or BSing them. And so that's why, you know, you tend to trust the guy.